Hey friends, welcome back to another video. My name's Emma Lefebvre, and today I am answering the question, how much water do you need to use when you are painting with watercolor? I am going to show you the perfect amount every time. Let's get into it. Okay friends, so today we are doing the ultimate water control video. I'm going to be talking about how to make sure you have the perfect amount of water on your brush and on your paper, because there are different factors that play into this that you need to know. Okay, so I want to try and break it down for you as simple as possible. The first thing you need to take into consideration is your brush type and brush size. So I'm going to show you a couple different brushes here. Here I have a mop brush, which is like a synthetic kind of squirrel hair. It's very, very soft. And brushes like these that you see with this very, very soft hair, I think I have, do I have another one? Ones that look like this carry a lot of water. It absorbs so much water and is really great for bigger washes where you want to wet up a very large area, okay? But smaller detail is not going to work. Even if you have a smaller brush, it still carries so much water in these bristles that you would probably end up having more water than you actually need. So brushes like these carry lots of water. Keep that in mind. Brushes like mine, so we have a size 12 here, I have a size 8, a size 4 round brush. These also carry a good amount of water, not like our mop brushes, but the bigger the brush, so like my size 12, the more water it holds. The smaller the brush, the less water it holds. And that makes a huge difference when you are trying to control how much water you are putting on your paper. If you have a bigger brush, think you're trying to wet up a larger area. If I'm trying to do like a tiny little petal here, if you're newer to watercolor and you're trying to work on your water control, you're not going to want to use a large brush. You're going to want to use a smaller one where you can control the amount of water you're putting down. If you are trying to, like I said, wet up a whole big background, you're going to want to use a larger brush. So these are both synthetic hair. But if you are looking for a brush in a store, you can feel the difference. These are a lot softer and these are a bit stiffer and snappier. So the ones that are softer hold more water. Usually a brush will kind of tell you in their little description on their display, or it might be called a mop brush. But these ones will hold more water. These will hold less, but still keep in mind, the bigger the brush, the more water it holds. Okay, so that is something you have to take into consideration. The other thing you need to know about is different papers react differently with different amounts of water. Okay, so here I have probably the most cheap watercolor paper I've ever used. I think this is from when I first started, like 6 years ago. It is Artist Loft watercolor paper from Michaels. I think there's one page left. It is not 100% cotton. It is 90 pounds, which means it's a thinner paper, and it's very smooth. So water does not seep into the paper the way we want it. So if I have a lot of water on my brush and I put it on my paper, it's going to sit on top and not sink in. I don't recommend using this paper, but if you are just starting out like when I did and you're looking for a really, really cheap paper and this is all you can get, just keep in mind, if you have a lot of water, it's going to sit on the top and not seep into the paper like you want it to. Okay, so we'll go over how to work with a paper like this. Now here I have two different papers. They kind of look similar. I know you can't really see on camera. This one is a Cadmium watercolor paper, which is actually very affordable in most places online, and it's really good quality. So if you're looking for a cotton paper, I highly recommend this one. And then this one is Saunders Waterford paper, and it's a rough paper. So with watercolor paper, you're gonna get hot press paper, cold press paper, and rough paper, and that has to do with the texture of the paper. Hot pressed is usually smooth, or with a cheaper paper like this where it's not cotton, even though I think, does it even say? It says cold press finish, but it's so smooth and inexpensive. It's just kind of cheap. I believe it's cellulose paper. It's a lot smoother. But hot press paper is smoother, which is, you can get higher quality ones, which I find is better for illustration. But the ones I work with the most are cold press paper, which is this Academy watercolor block. And I don't tend to work with rough because it is a lot harder to work on in the sense that you have to use a lot more water. It has a very toothy texture. It takes a lot more water to really get the color on there. And you just get a lot more texture with it. I just find it a little bit more difficult to work on. Cold pressed is my favorite, and I find it's the easiest to work on. Okay, so I'm just gonna give you an idea, because the perfect amount of water on your brush and on your paper doesn't necessarily exist, because there are different amounts that you're gonna need for different things. So I'm gonna try and go through it the best I can. And we're gonna start with a background wash. So when you are trying to wet up a larger area, say you're doing the wet on wet technique and you want to do a sky or something like that and you're trying to drop in color, I'm going to show you the perfect amount of water you're going to need to do this technique. So because this brush, which is like a size, this is a Phoenix brush, it's huge, it's a mop brush. I may use this if I wanted to wet up the whole paper. But if I'm just doing half, I probably won't use this. I'm probably not going to use this brush because I don't necessarily recommend getting these brushes to paint with watercolor. My set of 4 brushes, I would say, are pretty perfect for beginners, which I will link in the description. But you want a decent size brush to fill up. Let's say we're going to do half of the page here, okay? So we're doing a large area, and I'm going to show you the perfect amount of water for the wet on wet technique. So my brush is completely dry. What I'm going to do is, you don't want to just dip it in once. You want to have it nice and wet, okay? And you are going to apply it over your paper. Okay, now you hear that scratching sound? That means it's getting kind of dry. So you're going to want to dip it in and get it nice and wet. Now, too much water is when you start to see, I'll show you. When you start to see pools, you know what? It's really difficult. Okay, here you go. You can kind of see the shine. I'm going to show you what is too much water, because you can fix it and take it off. See this pool here? See that bead of water running all around the edge? That is not necessarily what we want, because when we try and do the wet on wet technique and we apply color to our surface that is this wet where it has beads, the color does not explode and blend as well as we'd like. Okay, we want to try to avoid these beads of water because it's just not going to do what you want it to do. So in order to do that, you can just dry off your brush on your paper towel. So I have a paper towel here and I'm just dabbing it, and you can mop it up with your brush, dab it on your paper towel again, like that. And then this is the perfect amount of water. What you should see is this nice shine all over the page. Okay, and it will show you what areas are wet and what areas are not. See this little kind of triangle here? That shows you that this little triangle is not wet. So that's a good indicator of what is wet and what is not. You don't want those beads or pooling in any areas. You want this nice shine evenly all over your paper. Now, it will start to dry, and what you're going to notice is more matte areas, and that's where it's starting to dry. So that's where you need to maybe wet it up again. You want, the whole idea is you want it nice and evenly wet to get this perfect background for the wet on wet technique. And I'll show you what you want. Let's grab a blue or a sky. You want your watercolor to be able to do this. Okay, and blend out nicely. Now, if you have too much water, I'm just going to show you quickly what you might run into. Okay, so here's our pooling. And if I try and add color in there, see how it sits? It just sits in the pool and moves only through the pool. We don't want that. We want this. Okay, so if that happens, it's not a big deal. Wash off your brush, dry it. You can lift it up with your brush, or you can even take your paper towel and just mop up that pool and then just evenly wet the surface again. Okay, that is the perfect amount of water you are going to want for the wet on wet technique when you're doing skies and backgrounds. This helps everything blend a lot better. So if I want to go in and add another color, let's grab some pink. Okay, having it wet already really helps everything to blend nice and evenly. Now, when I'm going back in with new color, I'm not dipping my brush in the water. You don't want to wash off your brush where it's dripping like this, dip it in your paint where there's a huge puddle, and then apply it. See that? It's expanding, but there's too much water. What this does, and what you don't want it to do, is it applies more water to this area while this area is going to start to dry. When that happens, when there are two areas sitting side by side touching, and one area is starting to dry and one area is really wet, that's when you get those kind of funky watercolor blooms, or like cauliflower marks as some people call them, and you don't want that. See how there's a puddle here? You do not want this puddle. And that happened because I washed my brush off and I went in with full water on my brush, right into my color, right onto the paper. You don't want to do that. Your first tip on when you're adding new color to a big area or a small area, say you want to add a new color, you wash off your blue, always, always, always run your brush against the side. Take off those extra beads of water. Now, if you're dipping into a dry paint and you need to activate it, you can go right from running your brush against the side of the jar like this, right into your paint. Say I want to activate this yellow. It hasn't been activated. It's dry. So my brush is wet, but it's not dripping wet. And then it will go right in very nicely. Okay, but if I go right in with this large wet brush, right into new color, see this huge puddle it's making here? That's too much water. And then it causes this big puddle. It's already seeping into the other puddle. They're gonna dry unevenly. It's gonna be a bit of a mess. If you want some cool funky marks like that, that's totally fine. Like, this is for my friends who want to be able to control their water, not get those marks. That's totally up to you, but that is why. It's because you are taking all this water from your brush, dipping it in your paint, then just putting it right on your paper. Like, can you see this? Look at that pool. That's too big. That is too much water. Now, if that happens, don't freak out. Again, like I said, take your paper towel, mop it up a bit, or dry your brush on your paper and evenly distribute it over your paper. It's okay. This is where you're going to learn how much water you need and how much you don't. And this is with a bigger surface area. So this is making it a little bit easier. It's when we get into the smaller areas that might be a little bit tricky. So recently I did a video on those exploding colors for our flowers, which we're not covering as big of a surface area. And I said, you want to paint with water first. This is where it might be tricky. So say I go in with my brush and I just go right with a lot of water and I create this puddle. Number one, I am using a really big brush for a small area. You are going to have too much water where you have this pool. Okay? So again, with our tips, if you want to use a big brush, that's all you have, that's fine. I would recommend moving to a smaller brush. Always take off that excess water. You can even just tap it a little bit on your paper towel, then create your shape. Even then, there's still a little bit of a pool. So like I said, I would move to a smaller brush. Let's go to our size 8, okay? I'm going to dip it in my water, get it nice and wet, run it against the side, and I'm gonna create a petal here. This is the perfect amount of water because I'm using a smaller amount or a smaller brush and a less amount of water. We're not getting the pool that we got with that big one. I know it's a little difficult to see, but see how you can see that shine? There it is. That sheen, that's what you want. Again, if you have that pool, just take your brush and just move it around so it's all even. Then you should be able to get that nice kind of like color explosion. So I want a little bit more water because I'm going to do a new petal. I can dip it, or I can go right to painting because I'm using a smaller brush. If I was using my bigger brush, I would run it against the side, maybe tap it here. Using a smaller brush, so I should get the right amount of water. See, there's no pooling. Then I should be able to go right into my paint and get my exploding color. Okay? So, if you are getting too much water, change your brush size. Okay? And this counts for little details too. If you are working with maybe some stems or little details, go for a smaller brush, like a size 2, a size 4. Okay? Change your brush size if you find you are getting too much water. So even like I can grab a lot of water with this. Okay? But I'm not going to grab as much water as if I were to use that big one. And you can just tap it in. Okay? So, the perfect amount of water when you are working on a large background, use a larger brush. Look for those puddles. If you are working on smaller areas, smaller details, use a smaller brush. That is my biggest tip. Always, always, always run your brush off on the side because you can always add more water. Okay, you can always remove water too, but it's just easier if you get into the habit of running against the side or tapping it on your paper towel. Okay, so the other issue I see a lot where people run into this problem is when they go back in to add more color. So I'm just going to do another, like a petal here. Okay, even before you start, you should look at your brush. Is it dripping? Does it look like it's carrying a lot of water? That will kind of gauge if it's going to work or not. So I'm planning on doing a little petal. I want to make sure my brush is not sopping wet. Okay, here we go. Perfect amount of water. Let me just take some of that color off. I want to do a lighter petal here. And say I want to go back in and add some darker, I'm going to go back in. I want to go back in and add some darker pigment. Okay? This is where I see the mistakes happen. They dip their water in their brush, or they dip their brush in their water. They go in, they grab a ton of color, a ton of paint, and you can even see on my brush, I don't know if you can see this. Focus, focus, focus. There is a drip. You do not want that much water. Okay? Because this is what's going to happen. It's going to take over the whole petal. Even though I'm using a smaller brush, I had a big drip on my brush. Okay? What you're going to do, I'm going to mop that up. If you make a mistake, that's fine. I'm just going to evenly, did you see how I just kind of tapped it on my paper towel a bit? I'm going to evenly make this wet. Then my brush, I don't need to add any more water. My paint already has water in it. I'm going to tap just a little bit, just the tip. And then I'm going to go in and add my darker color. Okay? No puddles, not a lot of water or paint. That is how you add those darker pigments for the wet on wet technique if you're trying to add shadows or anything like that. All right? So that makes a huge difference. So this is working on my cold press paper. Let's just try on this rough paper just so I can show you the difference, and then we'll also try this paper, which I'm dreading, just because it does make a huge difference. So let's try with a background. I'm going to use my big brush. I'm using a big area. I'm going to use my big brush. I have lots of water on it because I know I need to make a big area. I don't know if you can see this. Do you see how dry, like I'm missing? It is harder to wet this up because of that texture, that tooth in the paper. So I need to add more water than I would for the other one. Okay. Now, my paint is kind of dry, so I might take a little bit, just a little bit of water on my brush. Just a little bit, just tapping it. You don't need to go in and wet the whole thing. You don't need to do that. Just tap it in just a little bit, run it against the side just to activate your color again. And then go onto your paper. Bring it back and forth. Okay, I'm gonna wash my brush off to get a new color, run it against the side of my jar. If I have my paint that's already really, really wet, I don't need to add more water. I'm actually gonna take off some water by just tapping it on my paper towel. This paint right here, you can see it, there's a puddle in there. Okay, I'm just gonna tap it in like that to get my new color. And then to blend it out. That's really harsh. It's not really good at blending. Okay, if I want to go back in and blend this out better, you have to pay attention to how much water. Wash off your brush, dry it against the side, dry it on your paper towel, because you don't want to add any more water to this. It's going to create those separation marks. And you're just going to gently blend side to side. Okay, again, I want to wash this off. Run it against the side, tap it on my paper towel, blend. I do want to show you what's going to happen if you don't do that, okay? Say I wash off my brush to get a new color, go in yellow. I have lots of water on my brush and I go back in. Actually, it might not be too bad because this paper is a bit more forgiving. Okay, but say we add lots of water and we try and blend it out. I'm washing this off. I want to blend this out a bit more and I don't tap it on my paper towel and I go back in. See that water that's been added there? Because I did not take it off on the side of my jar. I did not tap it. Now that water that I've added there is pushing all the pigment away and you're not going to have a nice gradient. I'm going to leave that just so you can see how it dries. But you have to be mindful of how much water you're adding to your paper. And as a new or a beginner to water control and watercolor in general, these are things that you're going to want to have to pay attention to. Okay, so again, with like a little petal here, my water's so dirty. It's okay. I have this water. I'm using a smaller brush because I want to create a smaller flower. Get it nice and wet. Now, again, this color is very wet. I'm not going to go in like crazy with it. I might just tap it a little bit just to get a little bit of color. And I get my lighter wash. Again, remember with water control too, the more water you have on your brush, the lighter the value of the color is going to be. The more color you have in your brush, so say I want to get a nice darker value, the darker your color is going to be. So if you want to change up your values, you can work on your mixing wells here, but if you want just a really light value, make sure you have a clean, wet brush, not sopping wet. Run it against the side. Just kind of tap your color a bit. This one was dry. I'm just going to run it a little bit. Tap it on your paper towel just to check. And then apply it to your paper. Okay, if I want to get more and do that, I realized I had a little bit more water than I wanted. I just tapped it on my paper towel. Now I'm going to go back because I want a little bit more darker color on here. I'm going to just swish my brush in the purple color I had. Sorry, you guys couldn't see that. And then I'm going to tap it like that. Perfect amount of water. Okay? It's bleeding out nicely. It's not overpowering. It's good. Okay, so I had to use more water on this paper because it is rougher. Now let's get to that sheet paper just quickly so you guys can see, because this is going to be kind of a game changer if you are brand new to watercolor and you're working with like craft watercolor paper and you are getting frustrated to no end because it's just not working out. This is why. Like I said at the beginning, your paint is not going to seep into your paper. It's going to sit on top. Let's get our big brush, do our background. Okay. You can feel it with your brush, the difference between cold press paper and a paper like this. Okay. It's really like, it kind of like slides across the paper. It's really smooth, but I didn't even have that much water on my brush and you can see these pools. Okay. So I'm going to try and just move it around a bit. Now I'm going to tap my brush on my paper towel. I'm going to get my color and I'm going to go across. Okay, it's very, very smooth, but it can be a bit tricky to work on. See how you kind of get a bit more streaks too? Doesn't blend as nice. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to make sure everything's in frame. Okay, see how it's kind of streaky? It's not ideal, and there's a little pool here. Okay, I'm gonna grab my pink. I just tapped it in just a little bit. It's a lot harder to blend on this paper. Okay, so you are most likely going to get a lot more streakiness, a lot more of those kind of cauliflower marks, which I'm going to try and show you at the end. None of them have really done it yet because I was working on better paper. It tends to happen more with this kind of paper, but obviously can happen on your cold press paper. Okay, just taking a little bit of yellow, putting it in here like that. Okay, you're going to tend to get a lot more separation with this paper. It's just bound to happen. It's harder to work on. But if this is what you have right now to work with, the biggest thing I can say is make sure you do not have a lot of water on your brush. If we want to blend this out, we're going to dry our brush pretty well. And we're going to be very, very gentle with the way we move our brush over those two areas to blend them out. Because if you add too much water, it is not going to blend well. Okay, I'm going to wash my brush off again. I want to blend the yellow and the pink. Dry it off, or like just kind of wipe it like that. Dry it off on your paper towel. And then just gently blend. Like that. And that's how you're going to get the best results. Making sure you don't have any of those puddles. A gentle stroke. You do not want to press down too hard because it's going to lift. This paper also lifts very easy. If you put too much pressure, see how it kind of like lifts all that paint? Lifts very, very easy. Okay, so you don't want to have a lot of pressure. When you're working with a flower, I'm just going to show you again. So I have my smaller brush. I dipped it in my water and I'm going to go right into my color here. Watch. You're going to get more of a little puddle here. That's actually not too bad. And remember, if it happens where it's like this and you have that puddle, you can work with this. Just mop it up a little or dry off your brush and distribute it evenly. So when you go back in with that darker color, my brush is dryish. It's like damp, but there's no puddles. I would take just the tiniest amount. This paper also doesn't explode and move as well. You can go back and add that color. You'll notice if you have been using paper like this, a huge difference if you move to cotton. Okay, so I'm just going to try and blend it out. I'm going to dry my brush and I'm just going to kind of try to move that pigment so you get a nicer gradient with very, very light pressure. Okay. This paper is also really tricky because it dries really fast. So if you go back in to add that darker color, this part of the petal might be dry. You're going to get that separation. So the perfect amount of water has to do with your type of brushes, your size of brushes, your paper, and how much actual water you are placing onto the area, if you're painting a big area or a small area. I really hope this was helpful. I don't have any of those blooms I was talking about, but see, I'm trying to make one for you. It's when you have a more wet area that's right next to a dry area. You see this separation. Let me just quickly show you. Okay, that's not too bad. But you get this hard edge. That's not necessarily what you want. In some kind of more abstract paintings, it's actually really beautiful. But when you're trying to do a smooth gradient, this is what happens when you have too much water in one area and the rest of it has started to dry. So again, look at your brushes, your types, your sizes, the area you're painting on, how big or small it is, and the type of paper you have. And I promise with practice, you will get this. Okay, I think that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial and it was clear. Let me know in the comments below, and that's about it. Thank you all so much for watching my video. I really hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and follow me on all my other platforms for tons more content. Have a great day, guys. Bye.